Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou te whare. Ko māke o te maunga, ko waiawa te awa, o maramutu te marae, Ngāti rua te hapu, nuku tere te waka, tū tāmore te tupuna, te whakatōhea te iwi. Anō, te whānau e tūnei, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Ko Pētara Hudson ahau. I am a PhD candidate enrolled with Te Pūtahi a Toi, the School of Māori Knowledge here at Massey University. My whānau and I are looking at how artificial intelligence, how AI technologies can provide for cultural well-being for our whānau and their futures. This is our collective PhD journey. Please bear with me as I ensure the technology records what it's meant to record. So as I've said, my name is Pētara Hudson, and my family and I come from a small coastal town in the Bay of Plenty called Opotiki. At the conclusion of a recent whānau reunion back at our marae in Opotiki, or Maramutu marae, the prevalence of technologies was discussed, but not in the usual context. My whānau, who lived outside the tribal boundaries, asked the question, can technologies help make and maintain connections for us living away from the whakatōhea with those who live on our tūranga waiwai, on our tribal homelands? The initial responses were affirmative, citing the technologies that got us all back to the marae for the reunion in the first place, which included emails, Facebook, instant messengers, and video conferencing. We shared stories about the ease of communicating with each other via the technologies, considering that many of us have made our homes in towns and cities around Aotearoa, in Australia, and in Europe. Further conversations spoke about the different technology experiences we'd had. One conversation was about keeping our treasured stories safe and out of the hands of those who wished to use our stories for the betterment of their own agendas. And yet another story discussed and asked the question, why does Google Translate get Māori translations so wrong? Another conversation was around racial bias of technology systems such as facial recognition software. It didn't take long before my whanaunga stood up and said, deja vu whānau, history repeating itself. We all stopped talking and let our cousin expand the kōrero. This technology bias, he said, is the continuation of the imperial biases imposed on Māori by the Pākehā oppressors. The intergenerational trauma sustained by Māori through individual and institutional racism is well documented. Māori continue to experience insidious and unconsciously shaped beliefs, attitudes, and decisions of individual racism, which stems from personal prejudice. Although we have come a long way, racist policies and processes are deeply ingrained at the institutional level of our society. In Aotearoa hospitals, prisons and schools and throughout all levels of government, Māori are disadvantaged because of systemic racism. Statistical data of underachievement in education, poor health, dependency on welfare, and incarceration show that Māori are well represented. The historic atrocities imposed on Māori by colonial invaders of Aotearoa are the foundations of today's societal disparities. Here in Aotearoa, it is public knowledge that algorithms, a process to be followed in calculation or other problem-solving operations, essentially by a computer, are being used by WINS, ACC, corrections, healthcare, and the police to try to predict behaviour. The overrepresentation of Māori exhibited in poor statistic rates are now evolving in imperial-dominated algorithms and are proving to amplify bias stereotypes in artificial intelligence systems. Much of the literature centered around the Aotearoa artificial intelligence landscapes focuses largely on engagement with overseas literature and summary discussions with overseas experts. For example, in the 2019 Government Use of Artificial Intelligence in New Zealand report, it highlights the entrenching pre-existing discrimination in algorithmic tools used in a number of countries around the world, including the United Kingdom's police force. It mentions offensive profiling techniques, limited transparency, breaches of privacy, and automation compliancy. Here in Aotearoa, the New Zealand Department of Justice is developing an AI model called risk of reconviction and risk of re-imprisonment, otherwise known as ROC-ROI. ROC-ROI predicts different types of reoffending. At sentencing or at parole board hearings, judges and panelists are provided with reports which in turn determine eligibility for rehabilitation programs. ROC-ROI is a relatively simple algorithm using well-established statistical techniques. Nevertheless, the decisions that it informs could hardly be more important. Indeed, the application of predictive algorithms to matters of criminal justice are one of the most controversial aspects of their use. The Accident Compensation Corporation announced the introduction of an animated claim system. Their ACC system uses statistical models and a rules engine to animate much of its current manual registration cover process. The system is intended to automate and expedite the processing of the large majority of compensation claims, around 90% according to ACC. That is, it regards as straightforward. Claims that are more complex or sensitive will still be referred to staff members. There is a need for further analysis of ethical bias and accuracy, a comprehensive ethical framework that informs regulations for the development and operation of algorithms like the ones in the Criminal Justice Department and ACC is crucial. Professor Hemi Whanga asked his friend and colleague, Professor Rangi Mātauranga, about his thoughts on the impact of new technologies, including artificial intelligence. Professor Rangi Mātauranga replied, "Is artificial intelligence the new revolution, evolution, or the new colonializer for Indigenous peoples?" So this is where our whānau story starts. From the humble beginnings of kōrero on our marae, has grown a whānau research project that will examine the way my whānau, how we want to respond to dominant colonial cultured technologies. And to do this, we are asking the question: our whānau research is part of a wider project called Tikanga and Technology, a program developed by Associate Professor Maui Hudson, Professor Tahu Kukutai, and Associate Professor Te Taka Keegan of Waikato University. Our whānau research supports the Tikanga and Technology project by focusing on the identification of Mātauranga and Tikanga Māori, or Māori epistemologies and ontologies that will inform the building of next-generation artificial intelligence systems. Kaupapa Māori theory underpins our whānau research. A series of wānanga mareko, or virtual sharing and learning sessions, were conducted to explore, firstly, how we as a whānau use existing technologies. We then investigated what AI is and discussed how we can use AI to create stories and how AI can protect and keep our stories safe. Themes and reflections within the data gathered from our wānanga mareko were analysed using the transformative key principles of kaupapa Māori theory. Our initial findings are whānau. The principle of whānau sits at the core of kaupapa Māori. The concept of whānau recognises the connections that Māori have with one another and the environment in which they live. Being whānau, or practising whakawhanaungatanga, acknowledges the duty and obligations of fostering and maintaining these relationships. During a discussion with my mum and her mokopuna, her grandchildren, the following statement was made. The importance of intergenerational knowledge within our whānau will be crucial because we know from the change of technologies that the philosophies of why and how we use the technologies have totally changed. We need to share the knowledge of the generations with all of us. Tino rangatiratanga relates to sovereignty, autonomy, self-determination and independence, which allows Māori to control their own culture, aspirations and destiny. Ken highlights the elements of self-determination and independence when discussing the creation of marae virtual reality gamification. He shares, you can build modules inside of modules, in which it gives you the opportunity to explore in a virtual reality world. Inside a virtual meeting house, for example, you can build options of listening or finding out or diving into that story or moving on to the next. Once you click on yes or no, it then opens up a new module of that story. You are in control of the storyline. Taonga tuku iho. This kaupapa Māori key principle honours the legitimacy of te reo, tikanga and Mātauranga Māori. Taonga tuku iho acknowledges Māori culture and spiritual understanding in addition to other important key principle considerations. Michelle upholds the notion of taonga tuku iho and shares that the stories before us are just as important as well, not just our stories of today. Steve supports Michelle's thoughts by declaring the strength of the culture is sharing stories. This tenet, Akonga Māori, recognises the inherent and unique relationship practices of Māori. Despite the fact that not all of these methods are conventional, Māori prefer to use them. As a reminder, Here Here emphasises the fact that even though we can gather online, her preferred way of meeting is kanohi ki te kanohi, face to face. She shares, well, because of COVID, I've had to use Zoom, mainly for school and connecting to my teachers. I personally don't like it because, you know, face to face, you get more. Yeah, it's just different. Ka piki ake I ngā raruraru o te kāinga. This principle emphasises the necessity of mediating and helping to lessen the negative pressures and difficulties Māori communities face. This principle states that Māori communities must gain something positive from interventions for Māori. Additionally, it recognises the value and effectiveness of Māori-derived projects as intervention strategies for resolving present socio-economic problems. Mark discusses the creation of a whānau trust and emphasises the need to take the pressure off whānau members in the incorporating processes and the maintenance of the trust. He also spoke about positive possibilities from the creation of the trust. He shares, instead of putting a lot of pressure on the family in terms of like finances, we can look at other options like starting a charity. There's quite a lot of really cool investment opportunities within the Whakatōhea region, enabling us to build a bigger, financial stability for our trust. Kaupapa is the collective vision, aim, and goal of a Māori community. The kaupapa, which refers to the aspirations of the community, is more important than the intervention alone. The kaupapa is therefore viewed as a crucial and incremental advancement for Māori. Mahuta recognises the groundswell of social media networks and sees the benefits and the dangers of networks and stresses the need to keep our whānau knowledgeable about technologies. She jokes, but is very serious when she says, then there's personal life. Facebook, TikTok, Messenger, Gmail, YouTube. What else do I have here on the system? Music. We need to keep our whānau well informed. So, where to now? Whilst discrete testing is not in the scope for our whānau research, our research, however, identifies Mātauranga and Tikanga Māori that will inform AI systems. Our whānau are not in a silo. There are other national and international Māori and Indigenous researchers working collaboratively to combat the existing algorithms of racism. In particular, the work of our Ngāpuhi and Whakatōhea whanaunga, Kevin Shedlock. Working alongside Kevin, our combined research seeks to find ways to transfer Mātauranga and Tikanga Māori into Māori-framed algorithms, specifically during the problem initiation stage of the algorithm. Watch this space. This presentation shares the contextual AI background here in Aotearoa, the marginalisation of Māori by imperial-dominated AI systems. We share the initial findings of our whānau research related to identifying the elements of Mātauranga and Tikanga Māori that will advocate, and we advocate, can frame AI systems that will provide for cultural well-being for our whānau. And finally, very briefly, highlighted future research pathways. As kaitiaki o taonga tuku iho, as guardians of the gifts passed down to us by our ancestors, we are able to determine our futures. We will ensure that AI will be a new revolution. We will be a new evolution for our whānau. Collectively, we will combat the algorithms of racism. Te whānau e tūnei, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou, ka huri. Anō, ko Peter Hudson tēnei, ngā mihi koutou, tēnā tātou, ka huri.